You went to sleep last night. You lay down, you closed your eyes, and at some point, a point you cannot identify, a point that left no memory, a point that simply does not exist in your autobiographical record, you lost consciousness. Your sense of self dissolved. Your experience of the world ceased. The continuous thread of awareness that you call your life was cut, and you vanished from your own experience for somewhere between 6 and 9 hours. And then you woke up, and you called it sleep, and you felt rested, and you made coffee, or you checked your phone, and you moved into your day as though nothing unusual had happened. Because nothing unusual had happened. It happens every night. It has happened every night of your life. It is the most routine thing you do. But here is the question that neuroscience cannot fully answer, that has occupied some of the sharpest minds in the history of medicine, and that most people never think to ask because it is hidden inside something too familiar to examine. What is the actual difference at the level of brain activity and conscious experience between what happens to you every night when you sleep and what happens to patients in a medically induced coma? And when you look at that question honestly, with the actual neurological data in front of you, the answer that comes back is not the reassuring, clean distinction you were expecting. The answer is a gradient, a spectrum, a set of differences that are real but smaller, and in some ranges of sleep almost vanishing, in ways that should make the word sleep feel less like a familiar comfort and more like a name we use to avoid thinking too carefully about what we actually do to ourselves every night. You willingly enter a state of reduced consciousness every night of your life. You have never questioned it because it has always happened. But the neuroscience of why it happens, what it is doing, and what it means for the self that emerges from it is one of the most contested and incomplete areas of modern science. And the honest accounting of what we do not know about sleep is by any reasonable measure more striking than what we do know. Do not let the familiarity of the thing protect it from scrutiny. Familiar things are the ones most worth examining. Let me build the comfortable picture first, because it has enough truth in it to function as a working model, and just enough incompleteness to be dangerous. The comfortable picture is that sleep is a rest state. The brain downregulates, the body repairs itself, memories consolidate, the whole system does its maintenance and comes back online refreshed. Sleep is not unconsciousness on this picture because you dream, and dreaming is a form of consciousness, evidence that the brain is active, that something is home, that the lights are not entirely off. Sleep is, on this picture, a different mode of consciousness rather than the absence of it. You are in there. You are just running a different program. This picture is not wrong, but it flattens a landscape that has enormous variation in it, and the variation is where the disturbing parts live. If you want to understand how the universe actually works, not just how it looks, but how it works, hit that subscribe button. Let's find things out together. Let me tell you something about what the brain actually does during sleep, because the EEG record, the pattern of electrical activity measured from the scalp across a full night, tells a story that is far more variable and far stranger than the rest state picture implies. Sleep is not one thing. It is a cycling sequence of distinct states, each with characteristic patterns of neural activity, each representing a different relationship between the brain and consciousness, between the self and experience. NREM sleep, non-rapid eye movement sleep, dominates the early part of the night and is itself divided into stages of increasing depth. In the lightest stage, N1, you are barely asleep, easily roused, sometimes experiencing hypnic jerks, the sudden muscular contractions that wake you with the sensation of falling. The brain is slowing from the rapid, desynchronized activity of waking into slower, more coordinated rhythms. Consciousness is dimming but present, a twilight state where the boundary between waking thought and early dream imagery is genuinely blurry. In N2, you are more clearly asleep. The brain produces characteristic sleep spindles, bursts of synchronized oscillatory activity, and K-complexes, large, slow waves that appear to be the brain's response to external stimuli while actively suppressing waking. If someone calls your name during N2 sleep, you will not wake unless the sound is loud. The brain is hearing it and actively deciding to remain asleep. Something is still running the show. But the self that is running it is not the waking self. It is something else, something that prioritizes the sleep state over engagement with the external world, something making decisions without your conscious participation because you are not consciously there to participate. In N3, deep sleep, slow wave sleep, the brain is dominated by large, slow delta waves. This is the stage most similar to what we observe in coma patients in certain ranges of coma depth. The brain is not inactive. It is producing coordinated, powerful oscillations. But responsiveness to the external world is dramatically reduced. Waking someone from deep sleep is difficult. When they wake, they are typically confused, disoriented, amnesiac about their immediate pre-waking state. The transition back to full consciousness is not instant. Something has to come back online, something has to be rebuilt, and the process takes time and is sometimes incomplete for minutes after waking. Here is the analogy I want you to carry. Imagine a large building, a hospital, say, that goes through a nightly maintenance cycle. In the early part of the night, the building is fully staffed and lit, running normally. Then gradually, over hours, sections are closed, lights dimmed, staff reduced. By 4 in the morning, most of the building is dark and sealed, running on skeleton crew, with only the most essential systems active. The building is not abandoned. The heating still runs. The emergency systems still function. But the building as a place where the full activity of a hospital happens is effectively suspended. Then, in the early morning hours, things gradually come back online, sections reopen, staff return, the full activity resumes. Your brain does something structurally similar every night. And the depth of the shutdown in the deepest slow-wave sleep stages is not trivially different from certain medically recognized states of reduced consciousness. It is different, measurably, characteristically different. But the difference is degree rather than kind, and the degree overlaps with pathological states at the edges. Do you see what happens? The thing you call sleep is not a single state with a clear boundary from unconsciousness. It is a spectrum of states, some of which involve genuine experience, and some of which involve something so close to the absence of experience that the distinction requires careful neurological measurement to establish. This is the part that keeps me up at night. Let's be honest about what neuroscience currently understands about why we sleep, because this question, one of the most basic questions you could ask about the most routine thing humans do, does not have a complete answer. We have partial answers. We have compelling hypotheses. We have strong evidence that sleep deprivation is rapidly and severely harmful, that the pressure to sleep is biologically regulated by mechanisms we are beginning to understand, that specific processes happen during sleep that appear necessary for normal brain function. But a complete mechanistic account of why consciousness must be periodically suspended for the brain to function, why the system cannot accomplish its maintenance goals while keeping the lights on, is not yet in hand. One of the most important recent developments is the discovery of the glymphatic system, a waste clearance system in the brain that operates primarily during sleep, using cerebrospinal fluid to flush metabolic waste products, including proteins associated with Alzheimer's disease, from the brain tissue. The glymphatic system appears to be far more active during sleep than during waking, and the spaces between brain cells actually expand during sleep to allow better fluid flow. This is a beautiful, specific, mechanistically compelling answer to part of the why sleep question, but it is part of the answer. It accounts for some of the pressure to sleep. It does not fully account for why consciousness must be suspended rather than merely dimmed. It does not explain why the brain could not run the glymphatic system on a partial maintenance schedule while keeping the subject aware. The suspension of consciousness during deep sleep remains, at its mechanistic root, not fully explained. We know it happens. We know it is necessary. We do not fully know why the maintenance requires the lights to go out. Here is the disturbing implication stated plainly. Every night you suspend your consciousness without knowing why. Not in the sense that you personally do not understand the neuroscience, in the sense that the neuroscience does not yet have a complete explanation. You do something that is biologically mandatory, that you cannot survive without, that you will do tens of thousands of times in your life, and the mechanistic reason why it requires the form it takes, the periodic dissolution of the conscious self, rather than some alternative maintenance process compatible with awareness, is not fully understood by anyone. You are compelled by your own biology to periodically not exist in any experiential sense, and the full reason why remains an open question in science. Now here is where it gets stranger, because the question of what sleep is connects directly to the hardest question in all of science, which is the question of what consciousness is. And the relationship between sleep and consciousness reveals something about consciousness that we typically try not to look at directly. Consciousness turns off, or something very like turning off happens every night, without damage, without pathology, and then it turns back on. And the self that wakes up identifies with the self that went to sleep, on the basis of memory and physical continuity, but with a gap in the experiential record that is not a gap in any other biological record. Your cells were doing things during deep sleep. Your brain was oscillating. Your heart was beating. Your immune system was working. But the you that experiences things, the you that is present for your life, was not present, was not there, did not experience the deep sleep that the body was having. Where did it go? The honest neurological answer is that consciousness is a product of specific patterns of brain activity. And when those patterns are not running, consciousness is not running. And the question of where it goes presupposes a wrong picture. The picture of consciousness as a thing that is somewhere rather than a process that is either happening or not happening. On this view, asking where consciousness goes during deep sleep is like asking where the flame goes when you blow out a candle. It does not go anywhere, it stops. The process ceases. And when the conditions for the process are restored, the process resumes. This is probably the correct answer, but it has an implication that most people find uncomfortable when they actually sit with it. If consciousness is a process that stops and starts, then the you that woke up this morning is not the same you that went to sleep last night in any experiential sense. There is no experiential bridge. There is a physical bridge, the same brain, the same memories encoded in synaptic weights, the same body. But the experience was interrupted. The stream was cut. What resumed this morning is a process that has access to the memories of the process that ran yesterday, but there is no experienced continuity between them, because experience requires a subject to do the experiencing, and the subject was not present during deep sleep. You do not remember falling into deep sleep, not because the memory was not formed, but because there was no experience to form a memory of. The absence is total. And the you that woke up this morning identified with the you that went to sleep last night entirely on the basis of physical and memorial continuity, not experiential continuity, because there was none. Here is the visceral consequence I want you to feel. Think about the last memory you have before losing consciousness last night. Whatever it was, a thought, a sensation, a fragment of early sleep imagery, that was the last moment of yesterday's you. And then there is a gap. And then the first moment of this morning's you. The gap is not remembered as a gap because there was no experiencer present to register it as anything. The gap is simply absent from the record, the way a power outage is absent from a video recording. Not recorded as black, not recorded as static, just absent. The tape simply picks up again when the power came back on. You have gaps like this in your experiential record for every night of your life. Tens of thousands of gaps, each one representing hours of no experience, each one seamlessly bridged by the physical continuity of the brain and body, each one invisible to the self that wakes on the other side, because the self that wakes has no access to the absence and no experiential basis for finding it remarkable. You have been doing this your entire life. It is only remarkable when you stop and actually look at it. Now let me bring this somewhere true, because the sleep paradox, like all the best paradoxes, does not end in despair. It ends in a different understanding of the thing you thought you already understood. The fact that consciousness is a process that stops and starts, that it is not a continuous metaphysical flame but a biological pattern that requires specific conditions to run, is not a diminishment of consciousness. It is a clarification of what consciousness actually is. And what it actually is turns out to be more extraordinary than the picture of a continuous spiritual presence inhabiting a body would suggest. Consciousness does not persist through deep sleep because it does not need to. The brain maintains the physical structure, the synaptic weights, the neural architecture, the biochemical gradients that allows the process to resume in the morning, essentially identical to where it left off. What continues through sleep is not the experience, but the capacity for experience. Not the flame, but the wick, kept perfectly intact, ready for reignition. And every morning, the flame comes back. Not because it was preserved somewhere, because the wick was never damaged. The conditions for the process reassert themselves. The pattern begins running again, and the first moment of a new day's consciousness emerges from a brain that maintained the necessary infrastructure through hours of its own maintenance and cleaning and consolidation. You wake up the same person not because you experience continuity, but because your brain maintained continuity on your behalf while you were not there to do it yourself. Your brain is running your life not just when you are conscious, but when you are not. It is the most faithful thing you have. It maintains you through your own absence. Every morning you have ever had was a resurrection of a kind. Not dramatic, not miraculous in any supernatural sense, but extraordinary in the precise scientific sense, which is that the conditions for a specific and improbable pattern were maintained through darkness and silence and the strange maintenance routines of a sleeping brain. And the pattern came back, and you were there again, and you called it waking up and made coffee and did not think about what had just happened. What just happened every morning of your life is that a process that had genuinely stopped, genuinely restarted. And the self that resumed was continuous with the self that had paused, not because experience bridged the gap, but because the brain bridged it, physically, in the dark, while you were gone. Sleep is not a coma, but it is not a coma either. It is the thing that makes you realize the difference between those two states is a matter of degree, not of kind, and that you traverse part of that spectrum every night and come back every morning. And the coming back is neither guaranteed by physics nor fully explained by neuroscience, and it has happened every day of your life, and it will happen tomorrow, and you have never once thanked your brain for doing it. Consider thanking it. It has been working on your behalf in the dark for the entirety of your existence. It never stopped, even when you did. If this twisted your brain a little bit, good. That means it's working. I'll see you in the next one.